since 1993 now, so we're talking almost 25 years, I've been persistent with trying to figure out what this thing means. And it's really only with this, with Edinger's talk on the greater personality, that I finally grokked it. I think I've grokked it now, because when we talked about it before, um, I told you I thought it was the autobiography of my anima. Okay, but okay, there's certainly lots of anima in there, lots of anima, but this is definitely it. This definitely just it nails it, absolutely nails it. And when he talks about Nietzsche and his experience with Zarathustra, I say, oh my God, yeah.
Well, what triggered your starting the novel? What triggered it?
Okay.
I mean, you said you woke up one morning and you started writing. So.
Had you laid any groundwork for it? Did you know?
Yes. Okay. So let's go back and go through the steps, right? So I was in middle age, in my late 40s. I was retired from the Marine Corps. I was very upset about the glorification of having a war parade in Washington. Okay, when Norman Schwarzkopf came back and George H.W. Bush insisted on having this big parade, I was really upset about it. I don't feel that we should aggrandize the military like that. I mean, like the Nazis did it, like the Russians do it, and even some people with common sense prevented Trump from doing it, right? Because they wouldn't let him take tanks and missiles. Yeah, going down Pennsylvania. Yeah, he wanted to do that.
That was a rumor.
Apparently, they allowed him to have 20 planes fly over, but they didn't allow him to have tanks, and didn't allow missiles. But I mean, now this is 25 years ago. I was upset after Gulf War I that we were aggrandizing Norman Schwarzkopf and the military. I mean, and this is after serving 23 years in the military, so I just don't think that's the right thing for our country. And so I was very upset. I refused to watch it on television or go see it, even though I lived on Capitol Hill at the time. And that day I decided to go for a walk, and I was in a sort of a crisis in my career because I came down to Washington to be with Debbie, and I'd given up my job in Japan, and I didn't have a job. I'm in my late 40s. I don't have a job. So I decided I was going to go for a walk and decide what I want to do for the rest of my life. Okay, so I went on this long walk around Capitol Hill, around the Capitol building and so on. And I remember being in front of the Capitol building, right down in that area where the president was so happy he actually had people to cheer for him. I was right there, but alone. And I just suddenly decided I wanted to be a writer. Okay, and then I realized that actually I've always been a writer. That's been my profession. And I've always been writing, but writing for someone else, like you, right? Exactly like that. And so, but I decided I was going to write a novel. Okay, so then I had seen, who's the guy that wrote Jurassic Park?
Michael Crichton.
Michael Crichton, okay. So I had read a interview of Michael Crichton, like in the Wall Street Journal or something, and he said the way to write a novel is to ask a question. And so, for example, he had asked the question, what would the world be like if you could bring dinosaurs back to life, right, for Jurassic Park? and,
question.
and then he went from there, and he ended up, writing 2 or 3 books about it. But the way you write a novel is you ask the question, and then it opens, right? So my question that had been bothering me since I was 15, when we went to Japan. We had a live-in housekeeper, a young woman who was like 21 or 22 years old. And one Saturday morning, I sort of asked my father, why is Michiko-san here? She's from outside of Tokyo. Why did she come here? Why is she our housekeeper? And he said, well, young women come to Tokyo to earn their dowry, quote unquote, earn their dowry. And that question, that statement had been percolating in my mind since I was 15 years old, so for more than 30 years. And so I'm on this walk, and that question comes to mind. I mean, I was thinking about, maybe I could write something about Japan, and that just came to me, okay? And so I said to myself as I'm walking, well, what would happen if that woman started by coming to Tokyo to earn her dowry, quote unquote, but became the first woman prime minister of Japan? What would that life be like? Okay, and that's the story. That's the story of this novel. And so I would say 2 or 3 months earlier, my wife had been given by my mother Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola-Estes. And so remember last week I was giving everybody this caveat that now that we're talking about all this archetypal stuff, it can cause you to start having psychogenic experiences too. And so you need to be prepared. And Edinger literally, explicitly says that in this lecture. He says, the reason I'm giving these talks is I think people need to understand why these things happen. And because if you know something about it, then you'll be prepared for it when it does happen. And so that put me on sort of a caveat emptor that here I've been sort of leading people down the primrose path talking about archetypes for the last 6 months. And maybe you need a warning that maybe this could happen, okay? And because it did happen to me. And what really shocked me was that Edinger said that Jungian analysis is really designed to make you have this experience. That's its purpose. That's a central purpose of Jungian analysis. So how it came up was I'd read Women Who Run with the Wolves. I had read this story in it called Vasilisa the Wise. And at the end of Vasilisa the Wise, Estes put about a 40-page dissertation on women's individuation. Okay, the things that a woman goes through in her individuation process. And she delineated 9 steps. So I said to myself, okay, I'm going to take this woman from age 15 to age 75. Maybe I ought to pay attention to Estes's template and just put the template in the patina of Japan, and this woman is going to be prime minister. And so I did that. And so the first 24 chapters really cover that. But as I started to write it very early, I mean, it was like in the first or second chapter, boom, it took off. And Mako started to literally wake me up in the morning at 6 a.m. And, you know, she was there, she was a presence, and I remember her coming and waking me up in the morning and making me go to my computer and start typing. And as I said, it's very much like Nietzsche and Nietzsche's description here. I would put my hands on the keyboard, keep the screen very low so I wasn't waking my conscious mind up as little as possible, and it just wrote itself. I have no memory of writing it.
So it's almost like channeling.
Almost like channeling, exactly.
So how much was it grounded in the housekeeper you had?
In the what?
Housekeeper.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Only from the story.
There's no.
It had nothing to do with her.
But you said you had been thinking about this since you were a kid or something.
I was thinking about what that statement of my father was.
Mm-hmm.
These women would come to Tokyo to earn their dowry. Mind you, 16 years after I graduated from high school, I went back to Japan and ran a company there for 5 years and had lots of experiences, lots, okay? And so I really I learned a lot about Japanese society.
But you were thinking of this question the whole time.
I wasn't thinking about a question, I was thinking about a statement which obviously had some sort of numinous effect on me. The statement was, why is Michiko here? Which I had asked the question, my father said, because young Japanese women come to Tokyo to earn their dowry. Quote unquote, that's all he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. But it was a statement that was obviously very numinous for me. The short answer, finally, of this was when I had read Estes, so I had this sort of preparation like we've been having in this group, so beware. And then I had this idea to write this novel. Almost, I would say, within a day or two of starting the actual process of writing, boom, this took off. And once it took off, there was no stopping it for 8 months. Okay, every morning I got up and wrote 500 to 1,000 words until it was done. Okay, and I literally had this psychogenic figure, Mako herself, waking me up to write her story, insisting upon it. Okay, so let me read Nietzsche's description, which is in Edinger here. Okay, so this is Edinger saying, I want to give you an example. This will do it much better than any talk can do of the kind of ecstasy that Nietzsche could fall into. He describes it in his book, Ecce Homo. This is Nietzsche speaking. Has anyone in the end of the 19th century had any idea of what poets have called inspiration? If not, I will describe it. If one has the slightest residue of superstition left in one's system, one could hardly reject altogether the idea that one is merely incarnation, merely mouthpiece, merely a medium of overpowering forces. The concept of revelation in the sense suddenly of indescribable certainty and subtlety. Something becomes visible, audible, something that shakes one to the last depths and throws one down. That really describes the facts. One hears, one does not seek. One accepts, one does not ask who gives. Like lightning, a thought flashes up from necessity without hesitation regarding its form. I never had a choice. A rapture whose tremendous tension occasionally discharges itself in a flood of tears. Now the pace quickens involuntarily. Now it becomes slow. One is altogether beside oneself with a distinct consciousness of subtle shudders and of one's skin creeping down to one's toes. Depth of happiness in which even what is more painful and gloomy does not seem something opposite but rather conditioned. Everything happens involuntarily to the highest degree, and a gale of feeling of freedom, of absoluteness of power, of divinity, the involuntariness of image and metaphor, the strangest of all. One no longer has no notion, of what is an image or metaphor. Everything offers itself as the nearest and most obvious, simplest expression. Here all things come caressingly to your discourse and flatter you, for they want to ride on your back. On every metaphor you ride to every truth. The words and word shrines of all beings open up before you. Here all being wishes to become word. All becoming wishes to learn from you how to speak. Okay. I couldn't say it any better, but I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, that's kind of the way it came. And I'm sure you would agree, right?
But you don't have to go through this to individuate.
No. No.
You
I'm
work on little pieces of it.
yeah, oh, absolutely. But I mean, let me give you another example. When I was doing drawing and things, when I was doing drawing and things, I was working with colored pencil at one point, and I had 2 photographs of my parents from when my mother was a graduate from high school, so she was 18, and obviously very beautiful and lovely, and my father was graduating from the Naval Academy. And so I started to do these drawings from those pictures. And first of all, I started to do it very pedantically, where I made this crosshatch on the page, and I was very carefully drawing all the outlines and trying to get it just right. And then I started to draw it in, and it was late at night, and about 11 o'clock or 11:30 at night, all of a sudden something clicked, and it was just like it came, and it was just magical. And I kept drawing, and I drew the 2 pictures. And in the morning, my mother came down and looked at them, and she just burst into tears. And she took the 2 photographs off the wall and put my 2 pictures up. She couldn't stand to look at the photographs anymore.
How old?
I was, I don't know, 55 or something like
Wow.
that.
Let's put this on the refrigerator, right?
No, but I, it was like a power took
Right.
over my hand, and I just couldn't do anything wrong.
Is
in
this
that-
is this something like Jung did with the Red Book?
Well, it is related to the Red Book, absolutely.